In this lesson, I'm going to start painting the albedo or diffuse maps for this asset. Before we get into that, I do want to point out that from the last lesson, I did add this area light to help illuminate the front of the burger because things were looking a bit dark underneath the top bun. We'll get to assess that a lot more when I start to bring in these painted maps and rendering. You did get to see the result of this light in the thumbnail of the last lesson of this course. All right, so back to the main agenda for this lesson. In order to paint this thing in Substance, I could export this asset as it is in Maya at this subdivision level. All these are subdivision level 1, if you remember. I could take this asset, export it as an FBX, import it into Substance, and start painting. But it is fairly low res, and most of the detail is only visible when you render it and the normal and displacement maps are applied. So if I was to use this asset in Substance, at the very least, I would have to import my normal maps in there and apply them to the asset in Substance, which is a viable workflow. It's really cool. It's also a preferred method of painting because you can then bake additional maps from that normal map. But for this asset, I don't need to bake maps and I don't want to import the normal maps into Substance. I don't need them. What I'm instead going to do is export a high resolution version of this burger from Zbrush into Substance Painter. But higher resolution versions means higher poly counts. And that could also be an issue if you just overload Substance with really high resolution meshes. So the solution to that is that I'm going to paint this thing in pieces. I'm going to start with this top bun. And I've already gone ahead and set it to the subdivision levels that I want to take for the 3 pieces of this top bun. For the shell, I'm going to take subdivision level 4 because that's about the subdivision level where I get to see all the detail a lot clearly. And I want to be able to see this when I paint without having to import a normal map. If I go to 3, you notice it's just a little bit blurrier, but at 4, it's a lot clearer. The singe is fine at subdivision level 2, right? 1 is a little bit blurry and it seems to show most of the detail at 2. And then the last piece of it is the crumbs, which are fine at subdivision level 1. I don't really need higher subdivision levels, but I could take maybe subdivision 2 of this. That would make 500,000 for this one, 500,000 for the shell, and 120,000 for the singe. So that's about 1.2 million polygons in Substance. That is not bad at all. It's not going to crash anything, especially since I don't have high-res 8K normal maps in there. It'll just be these meshes. So going with this approach does mean that I don't get to assess the color of the asset as a whole, but that's fine. If I need to see my results, I'm more interested in seeing how they work in my Arnold environment in Maya and not in Substance Painter. I don't want to fine-tune it for Substance iRay or Substance's real-time viewer because I'm going to end up needing to make tweaks in Maya anyway. No matter how much you try to match your environment in Substance to Maya, you will still see some slight differences in the way things behave, especially with things like transmission. If I do need to see how 2 assets work together, for instance, in the next lesson, what I'm going to be painting are these cucumbers, this sauce, and this cheese. I'm going to send them together because I do want to see how they transition to each other. So I'll paint them as a collective. Now, when it's time to paint this bottom patty, I would like to see how this sauce and this cheese interact with it. So I will import them into Substance and apply the painted textures to them. I know it sounds complicated, but you'll see when the time comes. It's a fairly easy thing to do. All right, I'm going to export this high-res geometry out of ZBrush, port it into Maya, and prepare it for Substance. So with this bun on, I'm going to Subtool Master, export. These are fine. Call this top bun for Substance prep. All right, so that geometry is exported. Before I head into Maya, there is something related to painting that I'm going to do here in ZBrush that I can't really find an exact equivalent for in Substance Painter. And that's applying a base multicolor. It's something I do a lot. It's not really color information that's going to be that visible. It's just going to be an underlying layer, and it's going to provide some interest, some visual interest. So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to apply a wider material to this so that I can get on with this. I'm going to switch, set my background to black, and I'm going to go to RGB, and I want to fill with pure white. So I'm going to fill these meshes with pure white. I'm going to pick the standard brush. I'm going to pick color spray, and the brushes I usually like to use for this, some blocking brushes that ship with Zbrush. This is one of them loaded in, but I'm going to show you what they look like. So I'm going to go import, and I'm going to go to the Pixelogic download center set of materials, and it's these brushes right here. These alphas, sorry. I meant to say alphas. It's these ones. They have this really blocky like feel. I'm going to use this one, alphas 01, 007, 009, 500. So I'm going to load it in. And I'm going to hit Shift Z to showcase textures that I've imported that are going to help me shape this bun there on the side of my screen. But I also imported them here into ZBrush because I want to sample some color data from them. I'm going to load in the main one. I was considering using maybe that one too. I like the colors here. And ultimately just a base color, so that's not going to be that visible, so it doesn't matter as much. I think I'll try this one instead. So what I want to do is sample a color. So I'll hit C, and it samples a color, and it's good that it's very saturated. This is important that for what I'm about to do, you have a very saturated color. It helps to create a lot more contrast. And then I'm going to make sure RGB is on. I make sure I turn off my Z add or Z subtract, so I'm only painting. And then come over here and start to block out color. With this fairly light color, there isn't a lot of discoloration or multi-coloring. It's not as high contrast. But if I switch over to this very saturated one, it really gives me a wider range of colors. And this is just an overlay, like I mentioned. All right, and I'm going to export this with me to Substance. You see how it has like this weird discoloration. It's adding a whole bunch of different colors in there. It's really good. It's cool. And I'm going to also do the same thing with the singe. I have no intention of painting any of the actual singe color over here. So I just need this thing to transition from shell to crumbs. So I'm going to take the singe and I'm going to give it the same color, the same little block out. Just something that blends. You're more than likely not going to see a lot of this data. It's going to be really underneath. And then I'm going to hit Shift Z to bring back my reference and then sample this brighter color for crumbs. Yeah, like that. Go Shift Z. Also try to make it just a little bit more saturated. Same reasons as described before. And I'll just block in color. So this is the multi-coloring. All right, so that's it. I'm sending this over. Let me do a little bit of a cleanup here. Fill in that color solo. All right, looks like I got all of it. All right, so to get this color data out of here and into Substance, I'm just going to go to my multi-map exporter. So I'll go Z plugin, multi-map exporter, and I want to check everything and just leave texture from Polypaint on, and that should push all of this. Looks like I did leave. Okay, so I want to make sure I get all of it. All right, so I'm going to go to create all maps and export this Polypaint. It's done, and it's time to move into Maya and prep the exported mesh for Substance. I'm going to drag my high poly meshes into Maya. I'll fix the naming. And I'm going to apply a material to it. Just apply standard surface shader. And just for consistency, I'm going to use the same naming convention I use for the material here. So it's AISS Top Bun Matte. This is just what I want to see in Substance Painter. So I'm going to take this new material that I made in this isolated instance of Maya and go Top Bun Matte. File, save as. Top Bun FBX export for substance. And I'm going to select this entire thing, go File, Export Selection as an FBX, export, Maya to Substance. I'll call it Top Bun. I'm in Substance now, and I'm going to go File, New, and I need this template. It's the ASM PBR Metallic Roughness. And in the case of this top bun, all we really need is that, just the basic stuff for a PBR shader. So you're not going to see me do anything with transparency or opacity. I'm going to pick the highest resolution available here. I don't think it's going to be too costly. This is not that big of an asset. But then I'm going to go here and select my FBX file for this top bun. And I'm going to hit OK. And I should have my model in here in UDIM format. Okay, and let me look at the UV tiles. Yes, and everything looks correct. The crumbs, the singe, and the top bun. So I can save this file. Call it top bun. All right, now it's time to bring in that base color that I painted in ZBrush. To bring that in, I'm going to go File, Import Resources, Add Resources, and this is it. It's in UDIM format, so even if I select one, I think I should be fine. But actually, I'm gonna select all three. I think you have to select all three. I'm gonna open and define all of them as textures and go import. And it should bring it in UDIM format. And then to apply it to this, I can just add a fill layer. This is gonna be the bottommost layer. I'll delete this additional layer here. And within this fill layer, I'm going to alt-click color because I'm only interested in color. And then I'm going to drag this into base color. Okay, so this is that color information from ZBrush, and it's now ready for painting. Multi-color spray from ZBrush. See, and it's also fairly easy to navigate, nothing too heavy, and all this detail is here. And I can begin this painting process. If I need to, I can go get higher res meshes and bring them in here by just updating. Just go and edit, re-import mesh. So if I do decide that I want some more resolution, I might go collect it, because this does feel a lot grainier than I thought, especially its top shell. So after doing a little bit of inspection in Substance, I've decided to make some additional changes. I think I am going to go with a slightly higher resolution because it does look a bit faceted. So I'm going to go a little bit higher with all these. It's not costly at all, so I don't really mind just going one subdivision level higher for everything. So I'm going to send this higher res back into Maya and push everything back to Substance. Another thing I'm going to do is repaint this bottom one. I realize that I want a lot darker of a color, so I'm going to, and more saturated too. So bring this down and make sure it's saturated on this side. And take this new mesh and give it that color. So I just want really high contrast discoloration. And I was showcasing an example previously where I was just showing value changes, but this would be desaturated and it's just not good. It doesn't have as much discoloration. Not the type of discoloration that I want. I just want like a really high saturated value like this. You can even mix it up, end up with different bases. That should be enough. I'm gonna delete this old mesh. For some reason it baked it into the geometry and didn't want to release it. So this is more along the lines of what I want to get started with in Substance. So I will export these maps again, and I'll come back in Substance with the high res geometry and the new changes to the base paint. All right, so I'm back in Substance. I went and I prepped the high resolution version, did an export to replace the previously exported FBX with a high resolution one. So I should just be able to go edit, re-import mesh. And there it is. There's the high resolution version 1. Navigation is not that much of a hit, but if I start to add layers and it becomes a problem, I'll just go back to what I originally had. It's stored. Yeah, it's significantly higher subdivision level. Another thing I'm going to do is update this file because I did give the crumbs a darker color. So I'm going to right click and go reload. Looks like it only read 2 files, so I have to go find out why I did that. It looks like I had a naming issue. One of the files did not have its UDIM number sequence. So I'm going to right click and go reload again. And now I should have 3. And I do have to drag it back on here. All right, so there's the darker version. Now we're ready for painting. One thing I would like to do just to make sure I'm not distracted by any of this specularity is make sure I'm viewing this thing just the base color, and this will help me with my shading. It's time to prep the images that I'm going to be using to sample color data, and I definitely want my primary reference. And for this top bun, I also want to use this to assist me. I will be pulling a lot of colors from this. I like it because I can zoom in and see a whole bunch of detail that I can try to replicate. I will be using a very procedural approach, so I'll be dialing colors up and down to get the look I want even after I have painted. You'll see it's mostly painting on masks, but I do want to prep these images for sampling, and one of the ways I do that is to go into Photoshop, duplicate it, and then go filter, and it's pixelate, and it's crystallize. And what I do is I pick like a really small cell size like this, and what that does is that it gives you the entire palette, or most of the palette that you're looking at. So if I was to look at this top bun and I zoom out, it starts to really give you the colors, the individual colors that you're seeing. A lot of this is the lighting too, but it's good to have access to some of these colors. You'll be playing around to adjust things under the light source and to get what you want. But this is what I want to start off with. So I'll save this as a separate file and it'll be open on the side, and I can open it and sample. I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to duplicate it. It's already duplicated. Let me see what colors I get. I go filter, pixelate, crystallize. Yeah, this one also gives me what I need. Yeah, so that's a lot of color information, and surprisingly, they're pretty much within the same. Well, no, they're not. This is definitely a different, more yellowish hue, and this one is more reddish information. So we'll see how it works. As I mentioned, it's a procedural approach, so I'll be able to adjust to make things match the way I want. But yeah, these 2 images are ready, and I'm going to save them and put them on the side, and I'll come back in Substance Painter. Another good reason for doing this crystallization thing is, for here, for instance, it lets you see how values are distributed, and you can try to match that if you want to. It is important to know that the values are distributed the way they are primarily because of the lighting, but sometimes in an instance like this, you can start to see how the value differences are behaving. Obviously, this one up here is because of the light source here, but you start to see some differences in the color over here, and you start to see that this bottom side is fairly lighter. That is a pattern I see when it comes to burger rolls. Take a look at this one, for instance. This is also evident in our main reference and the image I'm using, but you see how, because of the way it sits in the oven, this top area gets more char than the sides. Right, so most rolls, typically when people see this color configuration, you're kind of looking at a roll. Like this bottom side is not as saturated, not as baked, not as cooked. And you'll see it when the roll is cut in half. The part closer to what will be our singe area is a lot lighter. But that is not evident here, right? It's hard to tell if that's what's going on over here. There's just a lot of interesting discoloration, and there's a lot of singe and gradation of the singe that has to be painted. So we'll get to that. But yeah, this is also an important thing to take a look at, and I'll have it on the side and let it help me. So we're back in Substance, and I did mention that I would be using a procedural approach. So you're going to see that shortly, but I'm also going to be using a layering approach. So I'm going to be layering in all this information on fill layers. Start with the first one. The first thing I want to do is add a fill layer. And this fill layer is going to be responsible for putting in some big shapes. Well, not just this one and a few others above it are going to be for putting in big shapes. First, I'm going to sample. It's just a color pass. I'm just painting color here. So I hit Alt and hit color, so I can isolate that channel. And I'm going to sample a color off screen from one of my crystallized references. Pick a fairly dark color like this. And then I'll add a black mask to get rid of it. And I'm going to go grab one of my favorite brushes for blocking in color. It's the cement brush, this one. And I'm going to right click over here, add a paint layer. And I'm going to start blocking in some of this dark color. I have to increase my flow. And just to inspect to make sure this thing is doing the right thing, I'm going to go over here and select mask. Yeah, it seems to be filling in. All right, and go back to base color. Continue with this block out. It's just making some and change the brush size as I play around. And ultimately, I'm trying to blot out some of that base color that I brought in from Zbrush, this base layer over here. I'm doing all this to sort of blot it out. And I'm going to duplicate this layer and delete this paint pass, add a fresh one. Actually, before I add a fresh one, I'm going to sample another color value from a reference. Then I'll add a paint layer and go back to using my cement brush to get some of this blocking in. I just want some abstract, big shapes. And if I want to, I can always come over here and just dial it around to play around with it. But I think this is not bad. So I'll group this, call it the shell, scale, base. And I'm going to do a similar thing for the crumbs. So I'll just duplicate this. Delete my paint layer. And sample a color from a crumb, a light color from the reference for the crumb. Add a paint layer and come in here and use the same cement brush to block in some lighter color here. That's good. I'm going to come back down to this one and play around a little bit. Some of that chrome color ended up coming here, I think. Yeah. So I'll take it out from here. I'll hit X to move it and look at the mask. Make sure I'm not bleeding too far into the shell with this crumb mask. Yeah, I don't need it here. So by the way, I hit X, which is a shortcut for painting with black. So black is basically erasing the effect of this very light color. Okay, so this one I'll call the crumb large scale base. And as a collective, these two will sit in a folder. And just call them large scale base. Let me inspect this one. That's good. Just a way to, lay down some abstract information that is going to be respected by the layers above it. Making sure it feels randomized enough and that I'm not making some noticeable repeating patterns. And try to make this top area just a little bit more darker. Let me take a look at the mask. Yeah, it's more evident at the top here. And I won't worry too much about, actually I'll try as much as possible to do some type of blending here. Back to the base color. Okay, just drowning out that multicolor a lot. Let me check this. Okay, that's not good. So I'm gonna go down to this crumb thing here. Make sure that I'm doing a fair amount of erasing here to get rid of that crumb color on the shell. Okay, yeah. Some good tones, good contrast. All right, so I'll take a look at it a bit and then I'll come back and we'll move on to the next layer that I want to put down. Before I continue, I'm going to use a more reliable technique to isolate the large scale base for the crumbs to the crumb mesh. If you remember, I was going up here and trying to paint it out of the shell. And all I really have to do, since it's now in a folder, is right click, add a black mask, and let me set this to mask so I can see what I'm doing. Grab the polygon selection tool and just select all these polygons. Is selected now? Yes. Now everything within this folder is isolated just to the crumbs, so I shouldn't see any more of the crumb paint on the shell. And if I need to do it the other way around too, I'll go and do it to the shell here. but I think I'm fine over there. So the next order of business is what I'm calling AO-centric color data, or ambient occlusion-centric color data. If you remember, in the baking lesson, I made sure to check cavity maps in AO because I felt like they would be useful. The cavity maps don't really have that much information that might be useful to me. Whatever they have, the ambient occlusion maps have them significantly better. Like this is for the crumbs, it's really good, and I'm going to use it. And this one's for the shell, and the one for the, this one's for the singe, and the one for the shell is also good. But the one for the shell, I might have to pull out the detail a little bit more. I've transferred these 3 ambient occlusion maps to my Substance Painter folder, and I'm going to load them into Substance Painter. So I'll go File, Import Resources, Add Resources, and pick all 3 of them, open, make sure they're set to Texture, and Import. So there it is. And I'm going to create a fill layer. I'm going to group it. I'm going to call it AO-centric shading. And what I'm going to do is right click, add a black mask, then add a fill layer. I want to fill because I want to pump this ambient occlusion, this UDIM for my ambient occlusion into my fill. Okay, so there it is. It's a lot of good data. It really helps. I could just use it like this, but I don't want to use it like this. Right? This is good, but all it's doing is just highlighting the shadowy areas. And when it comes to base color maps, especially when you're painting PBR based color maps, it is advised to try to avoid putting in any other information other than base color or just pure color data. So try to minimize the shadow information, try to minimize the speckle information, try not to be painting subsurface scattering. But you can also cross the line. You don't have to necessarily follow all those rules. And one thing that people who are shading albedo or base color maps for PBR shading do is utilize ambient occlusion a lot, right? It really helps to add some visual interest. So the next thing I'm going to do is try to pull some of this data out a little bit more specifically intensify it. The one on the shell is not as intense as the crumbs. So I'm just going to do a general operation to just strengthen this information. So I'll right click, add the levels, and then I'm going to pull the chart to the this side just to pull out some of that information. A lot more. So now the shell has everything as a collective has a lot more information. And for now, let me turn off some of these layers. Actually, I'll leave these two on. See what's happening. So the next thing I'm going to do is blend in a very cool texture with this AO map to get a very interesting result. The texture is a common texture in Substance. It's called black and white spots. I'm going to search for it. Spots. Yeah, it's black and white spots too. So I'm going to right click, add another fill layer, and I'm going to dump this black and white spots into the grayscale. And this is the result it gives me. But I want to mix it, blend it with my ambient occlusion. So I'm going to right click over here and I'm going to use subtract. Now, when I tested this, I do realize that because of how the black and white values are set up on my ambient occlusion map and this, I do need to add a filter on top of all of this and do an invert. Okay. So now I'm going to go back to this black and white spots. I'm going to start playing with this balance value. And it does this really good job of blending in. Yeah, like that. So with it off, this is what my ambient occlusion map is doing. When I turn it on, it mixes the black and white spots and creates this grainy like detail, which is really cool. Let me go see the way it looks like on the shell. Yeah, and it concentrates it in the correct area, right? In the areas that occlusion is rampant, or the occlusion value is high, so the black area. And this is primarily because there's an invert node sitting on top of it. Okay, let me try to play with the balance a little bit more. Okay. I'm going to split this aocentric folder into two so that I can isolate the version of it that's impacting the shell from the version of it that's impacting the crumbs. So to do that, let me just do a duplicate. Just call this shell aocentric shading, and this would be the crumbs singe. I think the singe should also stay in this folder. All right, so to do that, to make sure I isolate, I'm going to right click, add a black mask, and then just take my polygon selection tool and isolate everything here. All right, so by doing this, if I go back to my brush, yeah, the one in this folder, this aocentric shading in this folder should only affect the crumbs. And I'll go up here, add a black mask, and do the same thing up top. Isolate here. And now the one in this folder should only be affecting the shell. This way I can play around with my stack to get different results on the shell. All right, so first let me focus here and find a good color value to use here. I'm going to go back to sampling off screen some of my crumb information from the reference footage. So this is a color sampled off screen. And it's interesting. I can, yeah, get varying values, but I think I'm going to stay here. This pulls out the information well here, right there. So that's a nice little mix of AO and black and white spots. I can do some additional painting on this, but not now. This is initial prep work. All right, for the shell, I still think that the levels can be cranked up to pull out the data more from the ambient occlusion map. So I'm going to pull it to this side even more for the shell, and so that it really pops out. All right. Yeah, that's it. All of it coming through. That's really thick. All right. And then I'm going to go to the black and white spots and see if I'm either over serving or under serving. That's a lot of information. It's not bad though. It's good information. Anyway, this is what I mean by a procedural approach for some of it. Well, for pretty much most of it. It just allows me to come back and change this value when I see fit. So I'm going to keep it over here for now. And I'm going to pick a color. Once again, sampling from off screen. I'm going to pick a darker color, or a bright one for my reference. I think I might pick something darker. Yeah, that's not bad. It's pretty nice. Let me go back to the level, to the balance. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, I have to be careful not to drown it out too much. But also, looking at it, I may have picked something maybe a little too saturated. Oh, it looks like the saturation is fine. I'll go back to these levels, see if maybe I was a little too overexcited with these levels. Yeah, I might have gotten a little too excited with it. Yeah, this is good information. It's not bad. You do have to continually come over here and play with these colors. Yeah, I'll stop here. Okay, so both of them on. This is our starting point, and I think it's time to move on to the next step. But yeah, I'll keep looking at this and making choices about it later on. But now the real heavy paint work is about to start, right? This is all just laying down some foundation. So that's our ZBrush multicolor, large scale base, aeocentric shading, and now it's time to start layering on a lot of hand painting. All right, the next thing I'm going to start laying down is some crescent abstract information. When it comes to crumbs, you pretty much see the same type of patterns. There's a lot of mostly crescent shapes, some of them tied into each other. And I want to start creating the foundational detail that will be mostly visible to the end user. On top of that is going to come flakes in large, medium, and small scale. But even this that I'm about to paint, these crescent shapes, which is really going to dominate the surface, are going to come in large, medium, and small. And it's very important that it overlays onto what I have. I don't want to do any replacements at this stage. I have a good foundation that I worked really hard to get. So I want to make sure everything I'm painting is blending with what this discoloration at the bottom. So I'm going to add a fill layer. Then I'm going to add a black mask and add a paint layer. And then I'm going to get one of my favorite brushes. And it's pretty much a lot of people's favorite brushes, but it's the dirt brushes. You can use any one of them. Dirt 2, 3. 3 is really good. 3 has those abstract like shapes, which really will work well for the flakes too. But I want to try to use different brushes all throughout, so that I really get a lot of different type of information. And I want to start with Dirt 3. And for now, I'm going to bring it in white. And I'm going to continually vary the size of my my brush every once so often, so I get different type of shapes. And initially, I'm just going to lay this down like this, continually changing my brush size. As you notice, I like to do this thing where I kind of lay things down first and then I pick the color after. And now I'm going to pick a mid-tone value, a mid-tone color. Let me alt-click to make sure I'm only interested in color here. And I'll pick a mid-tone. All right, So this is one pass of it. I'm going to duplicate this. Make sure I remove the paint effect, add a new paint layer, come over here and then pick a different type of color, maybe like a darker one, and do this again. Yeah, vary that. And I really should have picked a blend mode by now, because as I mentioned, this is not supposed to drown out the underlying detail. So let me do that first. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to start looking for a good blend mode. Overlay, it's not what I want. Screen is very, very strong. Yeah. Side addition. Yes, add is usually what I pick. I don't know why. I might also end up, this is linear dodge. Add, pretty cool. Let me see this one. If this would also work with, yeah, it's a bit aggressive. But that just means that I would have to tone down the very saturated too, so I might have to play around with. I'm gonna inspect this mask to make sure that I'm not painting too much in one area, which is exactly what I was doing. This is some subtraction and then adding again. Go back to the base color. It's not bad. It's very aggressive. So I'm going to try to play with the layer opacities here and also here, so it's not so overwhelming. There's a good amount of abstraction. Looks cool. I'm going to do one more. Let me duplicate it, remove this effect, add a paint layer, pick another type of color. Over here, I'm focusing on more of these darker colors. And in this instance, I will actually go with a color of my choosing. Even though I sampled one, I'm going to go with a color of my choosing. And I'm also going to see if, yeah, this one I think I'll stick with multiply for. And once again, I am varying the brush size. But I'm trying not to come up with even painting results all around. I'm going to take a look at it on the material, see what it's feeling like. on a material level. That's a bit harsh. I'm going to try to reduce it a little bit more just to blend it a lot better. I'm going to keep the top area just a slight bit darker. This coat. So for now, I'll call this shell secondary forms. So that's like a step down from these really large, well, from this large base scale that I did. And I'm gonna try to mimic something like that also for these crumbs, and then I'll start working on this transition that's supposed to be singe. On this layer, I'm actually going to do one more of these, but with a different brush. I'm going to duplicate this, delete this paint layer, pick a fairly darker color, and I'll slide this around too, so I get like a dark color and darker color, and add a paint layer. And I'm going to grab the dots brush. Let's see. Yeah, get some. And with this tool, I will be increasing the brush size just to get some varied results. Just really want a coat, additional coat sitting on top of here. That's darker. Very important to just vary size, or else you're just going to end up with these really all the same type of scale. So pretty much every time I tumble the camera, you'll see me play around with the brush size. And I vary between doing like certain type of shapes, like planar shapes, and then also spiraling, right? If you just do one type of thing, you'll start to see these repeating patterns. It's not going to help it feel organic. All right, so take this for now. All right, so I was going to go into the crumbs and give it a treatment, but I think I'm going to postpone that because I might not need it based off of how much work has to be done to incorporate the crust into the crumbs. So I'm actually just going to start working on the crust. I'm going to work on the first layer of the crust. I'm going to add a fill layer. Make sure it's not in this folder. Okay. And I'm actually going to pick a color first. I want a lighter value. So I'm going to go to my reference and pick, actually let me show this first. So I'm going to be painting this darker tone, but I want a handful of transitionary tones that blend into the shell and into the crust. And the one that blends into the crumbs is going to extend into the crust in the ways showcased here. So there'll be a lot of dots extending further into the crust. The darkest part is at the core, so I'll paint that after, but right now I'm going to focus on this mid-tone, and I probably will paint another one to really blend it in. Or I might just focus on blending this in once I've painted it. But from the looks of things, I'm going to start with either the dots or dirt. I think I'll see. Let's take a look at which one of them does a better job. So I'm going to sample a dark tone about that dark, right? I'll add a black mask to it and add a paint layer. And I'll start over here. It's very important to, yeah, this might not do a good job laying down the burn as well as I want. Another thing I want to do is go up here and reduce the spacing so that it's tighter. That's another thing. That's something I might also do with the flakes for the top bun later. But I'm gonna reduce it down to like a 5 and start fleshing in this thing. It's very important to understand that it's not prominent everywhere. There's some regions where it's less prominent, so I don't want to overdo. Yeah, that's quite a lot. But again, this is supposed to be a transitionary tone, so I will probably reduce the opacity of it so it blends in. But it doesn't, the way I'm painting right now, it doesn't blend into the top crust that much. I should be angling it like this, but I'll come back and play with some of these. Do a fair amount of erasing. Okay, get it all here. And some of this stuff looks fairly sloppy, so I'm going to come over here and start to clean this up. I'm filling it in a lot better. And I start defining these pathways that are going to hold this crust, that are going to be charred, not too much. Some initial coating. I'm gonna get these areas here, make sure I fill it in. That should be enough. And then what I'm going to do now is reduce the, actually let me get some of these areas. Right. I'm going to reduce the opacity because this is just an intermediary, it's supposed to be an intermediary tone. That helps to blend a little bit. Now I'm going to focus on another tier, much darker than this. So I'm going to duplicate this, and I did name these ones for the shell, so I'll probably start doing that here too. This will be the Singe blend. Use Dirt 3. Actually, let me just name it like this. Dirt 3 Singe blend. And for this one, I'm going to remove the paint layer. And pick a darker hue. Add paint. And to get the darker core in there, I'm going to use a more prominent brush. So I'll use my cement brush, that one. Okay, looks like opacity for this brush has been pared down. I think my flow, yeah. Now in order to make sure I'm getting the edge, I'm going to go to material, make sure that I'm not really going too far into, because this should not be, it should really be at the edge. Okay. Let's focus on getting this core in. Some areas darker than others, some areas more intense than others. And trying to keep it at the edge. So now I got it on the lip. I'll go back to my base color. Okay. Okay. I'm going to create a transitionary color that sits between the original. Go cement. Singe dark core, and I'm going to create a transitionary one here, so I will duplicate this, delete the paint layer, add a new, actually first pick the color that I want to use. So I'll pick this dark color again, but this time I'll go a little higher in value. And then add paint. Make sure I've gone a little higher. And to blend this, I'll use my Dirt 2, also a good brush. Yeah, just to blend it a little with its surroundings. Acts as a good intermediary. might be a little too dark, so I might tone it down. Let me look at the color. Saturate it more and make it just a little bit lighter. Do it everywhere. Strategic about where it goes. Right, I'm gonna group this into the Singe Blend Intermediary, and I use Dirt 2. Called Singe. I want to find this gap, where this gap is coming from. Alright, so this is the aocentric shading. Somehow this bled a little bit too far into, actually it didn't, it's on the right mesh. It's just that I should have, let me see this mask. Okay, so it looks like I'm going to have to do a better transition into this crumb with this layer. Yeah, the black and white spots seem to have really extended. I'll actually go to the mask and add a paint layer, and then come in here and manually use another cement brush with a negative to get all this crumb information off of this shell area. So I'm just sort of modifying the mask manually to fine tune. Manual mod of mask, because it's bleeding into the shell a little bit too much. Getting rid of it will be good. Make sure I contain it to the central region. Okay, so that's a not so bad transition. I'm going to return back to the Singe and add another version of this dark color that uses dots. Go dots. Remove the paint layer, add a new one. Grab my dots brush, and I really need to go in there. I'm trying to create this crumb-like pattern, like burnt crumb-like patterns in this region. I'm going to focus on getting it in on the shell area first, and then I'm going to transition to the crumbs and try to get it in there. It helps with the blending of the singe. Because of the angle at which it is, sometimes it makes these really like straight shapes, which I don't think is too bad. I think it adds a different type of detail there, like these little straighter shapes. So it's not too bad, but if it starts to look weird, I'll probably go in and take them out. Every once in a while I do try to change the size of the brush. Have to be careful with that, it does. To make sure the camera is angled in a way that doesn't produce too many of those. But every once in a while, if a few straights show up, it's fine. Okay, so that's the transition to the shell. And now I'm going to get some of them onto the crumbs area, really dark ones. Trying to chart somewhat of the same path. That's a lot, so I'll be careful. Try to connect those pieces. And it's important that you do have these open areas are a little dangerous, so I'll be mindful of how they transition. Yeah, but that's enough of I think, yeah, the burn pieces. I'll make some of them also significantly larger. So I'll make the brush larger and get some of these spots. Okay. Alright, and then now I want a transitionary singe to this one on the crumb. Let me duplicate this. I don't know what I'm going to use, but I'll call it transitionary. Singe. And I actually do. I'm going to use dots erased. It blends very well. but I have to find a good color. And if you're wondering what I'm trying to accomplish, if you take a look at this, you have these really dark ones that I just put in, and I'm probably gonna have to modify. I have to connect them a lot better. So I probably will go and use the dots to do that. But now I'm going to try to get a transition to like the pure white part, which is not purely black. I'm probably going to need two because I just need a nice blend from the very dark ones I'm putting down and this crumb that's not burnt. So I'm going to sample delete that, add paint, and then I'm going to sample one of these transitionary orange colors, and I'm using dots erase because it does a much better job. Blending. I might have picked a color that's not gonna work, so let me, actually the color I picked that doesn't work is this one. I'm going to alter it a bit, yeah, so it's a lot better now. And this one might have been, it's a little too orange, so I'm gonna come down, bring it down a little bit. I'm going to try to keep it within the same regions that I put the really dark one above it. It's doing a dots erased does a better job with the blending as it's laying down the spots. But the thing I have to be mindful of is that these things are not just circular shapes, and that's what I'm getting a lot of. So I'm gonna eventually need to make some kind of a connection. Some of these very spherical shapes. So I'm going to add another paint layer here. Actually differentiate. Say this one was done with dots, and the next one is going to be done with something that produces more abstract, not so crescent shape. So that would be dirt 3. So I'll go with dirt 3. Okay, that's a bit aggressive. So I'm going to change the spacing to very sparse. And that might still be a lot. But it is helping to append to this spherical shapes. Change them a bit. Some of this stuff might have to be done manually. Yeah, I'm going to add another one and call this manual, so I can connect some of these islands with my cement brush. I think that would do a much better job. Might need a stronger brush. Let me try my basic hard. Yeah. So I'll start to stitch some of these together. Because that's typically what you see with the singe inside. Let me zoom out. As long as I'm not just staring at like these spheres, that's good. And I'll do it with the transitionary dots erased one too. To make sure they look organic. Trying to jitter my hand a lot more. I don't end up with these machine-like results. All of the same width. Yeah, I might have done too much here. Yeah, I'm gonna need a lot more than I thought. And I am going to go with a more abstract brush because this basic hard is producing some fairly straight machine-like results as expected. And now I'm starting to see that it's not just about just charting these pathways, it's really just about sort of connecting them together, even if with like a scribbling type operation like this. So some of these charted pathways I'm going to discard them because they do look a little weird. Some of them look really bad, like here. Here. Make sure we don't have just spheres. Alright, so I should call this connectors. Manual dot connectors. Just looking for a descriptive name that will let me know what I did. But this one now, I'm gonna have to go through and do a similar thing for this one. I'm gonna add a paint layer. And I should say I'm using the cement to same here. here, and the objective here is to make sure I go over the areas that have that connection and have like a transitionary intermediary that blends into the white of the bread a lot better. I want to go over everything I just did this manual dot connection for, and every once in a while I'll go up here and fix this because some of these look not so too machine like, so I might go in and fix them, and then come down here and make sure that right underneath them they have a transitionary singe, hotter value. It's becoming evident that I might need a lot more than I thought, or I might need to scale back on it. It does. Yeah, I don't think I have enough to sell the. Yeah, I think I'm actually going to erase the ones at the center. It's not reading as well as I thought, so I'm going to lose a lot of the stuff at the center here. Just try to focus on making sure this stuff blends into the outs, is more so on the outskirts, and then blends into the. And leave the center a little bit alone. Might come back with dirt. And get rid of some of this one. Yeah, I might have just gone a little too far with it. Over here, go to dirt 3 and be more descriptive here on the outskirts, closer to the singe. And let's get a little bit more. Yeah, I think those pathways are not working as well as I expected. I won't overemphasize them. And take them away, and not entirely, but to some degree. And one thing I am probably going to do to define the crumb layer a little better yeah, I need to take a look at this, see how it's reading. I feel like it's not the best. I might need to do a little bit more transitioning here. With dirt. It needs to be a better way in which it's tying into the main crust. I'm going to reduce the spacing. And define some of these areas a little bit better. So there's a connection to the really burnt parts from the border. Yeah. Yeah, those pathways didn't work too well. I still feel like I need another intermediary color, a lighter one to go to the crumbs. I don't think this is enough, so I'm going to duplicate this, bring it down here, delete these 2 layers, and pick a more golden color, add paint. See if I can get a nice transitionary golden color. That is very strong. That might be a little too strong. I might have to change that. And it's also something that with all of this, I do want to contain this, specifically these two. These two should not extend into the shell. So with these two, I'm going to group them. Let's see, crown mask. Add a black mask. Make sure they are only going to impact these polygons. Let me go back to paint, check it. Okay, so it only impacts what's in here. And then now I'm going to come over here and find the better transition color I'm looking for. Maybe there. So that these dark tones transition into the white of the crust a lot better. X and tone down some of this dirt here. So I might have gone a bit aggressive. Little bigger sections of this stuff that I should probably dial back. And it's not a particularly nice pattern. The more I look at it now, like this big blocky mass here. So I will shave away some of this. This is dirt 3, so I'll label it. All right, I'm going to take a look at it a bit. And, yeah, weirdly enough, the more I look at this version, it doesn't look like it's contributing well enough. So I need to find out why, whether it's because it's just too intense. If I start to crank down, yeah, the opacity comes down a little bit. I think that's what it was. It was so much, it wasn't blending well at all. But now all of a sudden feels just a little bit better. But I still don't like these large chunks. Yeah, this is where it's coming from mostly. So if I start to just eat away at some of these chunks, it just looks really weird for them to be so chunky with it all. Alright, I'm gonna step away and just take a look at it just so I don't do all this and make all these unnecessary changes. I'm going to take my attention away from these crumbs and not do any further work on them until I have at least tested them out in Maya with Arnold. Before I take it to Maya, I will do some tests in Substance Painter with roughness and subset for scattering. I'll construct a fairly simple roughness map from some of these masks that I've created. And then when I get to Maya and I see what this thing looks like, I'll be able to make final decisions about what changes I have to come in here and make. But for now, the next thing I'm going to move on to is laying down this light flaking. And really, this shell is not completely ready to receive it, but because of the procedural workflow that I'm using, I can put down these flakes and then go ahead and make changes to these underlying layers to make the final texture work. So this is me just jumping ahead and starting to lay down some of these flakes. I'm going to put several different layers of them down at different opacities, because if you look at this reference that I'm using as a guide, you see a lot of that. You see a lot of this white flaking, and there are crescent shapes welded together mostly. You see, very rarely do you see a circular shape. So I'm going to stay away from the dots brush when it comes to this. One thing about this flake result is that if it's successful when I look at it in Maya, I might take the masks that I'm about to create for these flakes, combine them all together and send them back to ZBrush, do an inflate or an extrusion, just so that the areas that I've painted these flakes are elevated a little bit to truly simulate what is going on here. So let me get started. I expect this flaking to be under the singe. So I'm going to come over here, add a fill layer, and then I'm going to right click and add a black mask. And the first thing I want to try is this mold brush that I have. I'll eventually go back to some of these other brushes. This dirt is a dirt 3, which produces good abstracts. No dots, as I mentioned, it's just too circular. So I'm going to be trying out this mold, maybe some dots erased, but there's also this cool one it's a common brush in Photoshop by an artist, Kyle, and it's his spatter brush, and it's really cool. So I might mix that into, but I want to start with this mold one and just see if it gives me something good. So I'm going to add a paint layer, grab this mold, and start adding some of this flaking. And it looks a little, let me change the spacing. So let's see if that helps. I'll return the spacing back to what it was. If it comes down to it, I'll do a subtract pass, but I'm just gonna lay this down initially. And these, whatever they turn out to be, as far as color, should be entirely controlled by the underlying layers. So when I do additional adjustments to the underlying paint, it should echo up to these changes I'm making here. So if I was to come over here, I would dial these down. Well, and I'll pick Okay, so further down the line, one thing I want to do is I'm gonna grab my dirt brush and disrupt this a little bit before I start. I add another layer. I'll hit X and just disrupt this so it's not these very visible sections. I'm going to be doing quite a few layers, paint layers to get this. Right. All right, I'm going to make sure this one is mold. So I'll make sure I use the mold here and subtracted with dirt 3. Add another paint layer and try to make this more interesting. I'll use tile spatter. I'll grab this. This time I'm trying to make sure I extend this to the whole. Yeah, bring this back. And just coat the whole thing, and then it's too big. I will isolate all this to the shell. I don't need any of this on the crumbs. All right, let me start dialing this down, see how it contributes. Okay, and that is a lot, so I'm going to now do some subtraction. One thing about the underlying colors is that they're too high contrast, so I'm about to make the necessary changes to make them act like a proper foundation. So I'm gonna now, before I continue, go back down to all these contributing layers and start playing around with the shading, the colors, so I can get something that meets my needs a lot better. So there, and this is, yeah, this is a big one that's really doing a lot of, let me see if I can get different types of colors in here. That. Yeah, I'm getting there. And some good changes. And I'm going to also go down to my singe, one of my singe transitionary meshes. Not that one. It's definitely one that's sitting underneath here. It's just a little too dark. Not that one, probably this one. Yeah, this one is not blending as well. So I'm gonna grab this, start looking for a better transitionary color. Start here. I sampled something off screen and I'm going to find one that blends a lot better. That's pretty good, but it is singed, so do need a little bit more saturation, I feel. Yeah, that feels really nice right there. This is a good transition. All right, so this will be a good point. Now I need to make sure that this flake color is not really working as well as I thought. So I'm going to try to sample. Yeah, it does have to be something like this, but probably more desaturated and a higher value. Yeah, a lot less saturated. Actually, I would need more than just this. I would need another tier because there's a lot of different values. And that's one thing I should have stopped myself from doing. I should have broken these up into several different tiers, and I can still do that. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to make sure that this one only has the mold and this one only has cow spatter, so that I can come here and play with this value, because I'm going to need different results to mix to give me the type of flaking I want. Okay, this is really good. And maybe with this one, yeah, this is too low. It's really dominant, a really dominant effect. It's all over, but it does, one thing it does do on the main reference is that it blends in very well. I have to be mindful of that. Let me see if, Yeah, I'm going to use dots erase to add another tier of it, and potentially also yeah. So I'm going to duplicate. Let me check these two to make sure they are in fact different, significantly different from each other, slightly varied. So I want a lighter one. I'm going to come over here, duplicate this. Remove this, add a paint, and grab a significantly lighter color. I think the first color that it's a more desaturated one. I'm going to see if dots erased can contribute some value here. That's not bad. Vary the brush size to get different results. I'm gonna try, so this one was dots erased. I should be a little bit more consistent with this naming convention. I'll go up and clean that, make sure that I'm putting information in the same way. Here's another one here that also is a little abstract. It's called Pollock. And I do like that one too, so let me see if I can pepper it on. It's called Pollock. Just to get more variety, I will change this color slightly. See if I can go with like something over there. More saturated. I'm going with a higher value of more saturated. We'll see if this actually is worth the while. If not, yeah, that's a lot. I'll be careful with it. Yeah, that's not bad at all. It mixes in pretty well. Just have to be careful about when you get to these final stages. You have to be careful about just spraying wantonly and be a little bit more conservative about how you're laying down information. make sure that one thing about this thing is that it lacks a certain interest generally that I want to kind of bring back in, and trying to figure out if I should add something on top of it to do it, or let me group this, call these flakes. I'm going to go back down to my big large scale shapes and see how they're impacting this piece. Okay, almost negligible. They're really down there. They're contributing, but they're not in a very big way. I want to do some general toning. Okay, maybe the real issue was what I picked for this aocentric shading, because when I turn it off, I get a lot more interesting breakup that I had on the underlying foundation. So here, for the shell, I might want to play around with this value, yeah, so I can get back some of that high contrast feel, which I seem to have lost. But I still think that I'm going to do some general toning over the flakes for the top of this thing. So I'm going to add a fill layer, add a black mask, and I'm going to pick a color off screen, add paint, and I'll probably change it shortly when I start to see what it looks like. And then I'm going to grab my cement brush, actually this one here, and see if I can just some large scale breakup up top here. So when you're looking at this thing, this doesn't feel all even. Before I continue, I'm going to really inspect it. Yeah, it just it makes things blending a lot better, and everything doesn't just feel so layered. Like right now, you can almost tell that the flakes are the highest in the stack, and this, you know, adds some, lets some of them recede, and it sort of unifies all this flaking, because this flaking feels really surface level. You can tell like it's just sitting on top. So be careful where I put it and not to do too much. Just pick strategic areas where I'm sort of lightening the underlying detail a little. Not too much. I've got a pretty large area. Call this large scale blotting of flake detail. Actually, everything of detail underneath. And I use cement for this. I'm going to do another one in a different color. Paint. Group this. Large scale blotting of underlying detail. I'll do this cement again. Pick another color, that prominent color. darker one that's in my reference. I'm gonna come over here and yet again use the cement. This one I'll use in significantly smaller regions. Be very careful not to blend out these flakes in the darker region. There. Adds a lot more visual interest. You're not looking at something so flat. And I think that's about enough. Don't go too far. Make sure every part of it gets a little bit of it. I'm gonna stop. Don't go too far. But now I do realize that these flakes need to do a much better job blending in. I think this uppermost one, not this one. Well, both of them. These two are definitely too. Yeah, I'm gonna pick a different hue. Let's see if I can grab something else. And also okay, and I'll come over here. This one I'll just try to come down. I think the most important thing is that the opacity has to come down so it can blend with what's underneath a lot better. All right, yeah, I think this is about a good stopping point. I'm gonna do one more thing and then I'm gonna postpone the rest of the work for the next lesson. In the next lesson, I'll be testing out the roughness. I'll be testing out substance for scattering, and then we'll go to Maya and test this out and see what it looks like under the lighting. And then we'll know what changes have to be made in Substance Painter. But before I leave, I'm going to add one more singe layer. Like this, one more really darker singe. So let me duplicate the topmost singe layer, which is at the core. So I'm adding a new core. And let me delete all of this. I'm not going to use dots for this. I'm going to use more than likely cement. Darker core is what I'll call it. This would be a slither. It's not going to be too much. So I'd basically be coming lower here and add paint. I'm gonna grab this cement brush and let me turn on material so I can see the edge initially. And let me look at the masks to see what's happening. Okay, so I'm painting a core. Let me go back to base color and see if it's dark enough. No, it's not. It's very red. Okay, I seem to have picked. Okay, that's my core. So I picked the wrong thing to duplicate. I'm going to go over here, store this color, come up here, grab that color, and then go slightly darker. One thing about PBR is you do want to be careful. I probably have gone too far into the dark. As far as the values are concerned, I might have gone a little bit too far down here. There's a certain cap. You probably could go lighter, a lot more lighter than you can go darker, but if it's an issue, I'll come back and change it. But for now, I think I should be fine. And I'm going to paint this slither. Let me see if it's taking. Yeah. Okay, I know what's happening. That's why I felt the need to keep going darker, because the opacity is cranked down. So now I realize I might be a little too dark. So I'll come maybe over there. So down here somewhere. And I probably want to return back to my cement brush, because it was more than likely doing the job. And sometimes you have to click the brush a second time. Right, so just going in there and defining a significantly darker core. Okay, let me check the mask to make sure I've gone all the way around. Okay, I have more to go. I'm gonna back to base color. All right, so I am seeing this really small dotting on the flakes. I guess I might need to use dots. So I'm gonna come over here, add paint, and just grab my dots at a really small size. Just sprinkle in some dots in strategic areas. Not too really small, I just want it to, yeah, very small scale like that. Around the flakes. When they feel like isolated islands, then it starts to feel wrong. So where the large ones are concentrated, I'm going to try to pepper in this really small tier of flaking. And as I mentioned, I might take all these masks I've painted for the flakes, all of them as a collective, turn it into a black and white map, and take it to ZBrush and maybe do an inflation. I'm not going to determine whether or not that's needed now, because I have not seen what this thing looks like on the final high-res model. All right, that's all that I'm going to do for this lesson. In the next lesson, I'm going to draft a quick roughness map from some of the masks that I have. I'll probably do some additional painting. The objective is to make sure that the shell is a lot glossier and that the crumbs are really rough. So this will be low roughness and this will be high roughness. Go into Maya and connect this texture to my base color and also do some modifications to it to create a subsurface map. And then I'll test all three together, the base color, the roughness, and the subsurface connections, to see what I'm getting and to see what changes have to be made to make this thing work. I'm pretty sure when I look at it up close in Maya, I'll have a lot of additional changes to make, but I don't want to go any further until I've tested it. So what I'm going to do here is make sure that I group all this. And call this my base color, because next time when I come, I'll create a group that is for roughness. And then I'm also going to go in here and make sure that I'm only checking color for all these swatches. So I'm alt click, because they should not have anything other than they shouldn't be impacting anything other than color. All right, so yeah, every single swatch has been altered in the material section to only impact color. All right, so we're good. So this is the final file for this lesson. Before I go, one more thing I'd like to mention that I'm going to do before saving and closing this file is I'm going to bring down the size. I'm going to go into the texture set settings and bring the size down from the 4K to a 2K. These things matter with Substance when you're saving the file, right? It can be really large on disk depending on what you've picked over here, and it also increases load times for some reason. So when you bring it down to these smaller numbers for saving, the file is smaller on disk and a lot more manageable when you first open it. I don't know why. I don't know why this matters. Maybe I was wrong the first time I noticed it, but yeah, so I'm going to bring this down and allow it to resample it at a lower resolution. But when we come back to painting, I will make sure I crank it all the way up, and I'll do the same when it's time to export. All right, so I'll see you in the next lesson where we do all the things that I just went over. Maya testing, roughness painting, subsurface testing, and coming back here, making paint fixes, and then potentially using the flakes, the painted flakes, to alter the ZBrush model and re-export displacement and normal from ZBrush with the changes made with the flakes mask that I get from this file. So see you in the next lesson.